My students have just completed an assignment where, for the first time, I allowed them to use AI to complete the assignment. Now, this was my sociological autobiography assignment. Previously, I've made a video about the description of this assignment, how to do it, but more recently, I made a video about how AI is probably going to destroy this assignment, because not only can it write your papers for you, but it can even create your own personal autobiography and background narrative. Of course, it's not completely accurate, but based on a few demographic information, it can really come up with a lot of information. So this is the first time I've had the assignment since AI, and students were allowed to either use AI or just carry on in the traditional way of writing the assignment about themselves and applying sociological concepts. So about half of the students did just write the assignment themselves and stated that they did not use AI. And about half of the students did use AI to complete the assignment. And then ChatGPT asked the student to supply some of their personal information so that it could make up the rest of the story. And so some students really put in a lot of details into that prompt themselves, and therefore they got back a lot of information. And what they got back was ChatGPT, remarkably, was very able to create a very realistic story about their background. And of course, it's not completely accurate. What was more surprising is that it is quite accurate. And so what I really wanted students to do with this information is to sociologically analyze and assess what kind of information the AI is pulling on and what kind of assumptions it's making based on what information was provided. And so some of the assignments where the students did better was that they really analyzed what ChatGPT came up with, and it really also made them reflect on how much of their life is just based on these larger demographic and social structures outside of their control, and that they are perhaps less individuals than they thought. I myself felt that way. So for example, in thinking about this assignment again, I just asked ChatGPT to write a sociological autobiography of myself, but I only gave it 2 data points. I gave it my hometown and my birth year, and it wrote up quite a long narrative, and it offered to write an even more lengthy narrative and provide more details and so on. And so just by providing 2 data points, I was really surprised to see that it really created quite a detailed historical outline of the context in which I grew up. It talked about the history of my town, Spokane, how we were just coming out of the expo that developed this downtown park that was really a centerpiece of the city. I did grow up during that technological transition period into personal computers and before cell phones and stuff like that. So those kinds of contexts, it was certainly able to talk about, and how I grew up in those contexts, and just some of the social norms of my generation and that part of the country as well. Of course, it assumes that I was a white person, and of course I grew up in a town that was 90% white, so that is a very accurate guess. And so overall, I guess what changed in being able to use AI for this assignment was that itself, rather than personally writing the narrative, which I think has been useful for students to reflect on their larger historical experience, and including their parents and grandparents, but just their kind of social context for their entire family. That has been useful for them to explore. But I think it was also useful for them to see that AI can just generate this story that is quite accurate for them based on their demographics and information alone, and that they really are a product of their environment. So it seems like that was the outcome of this assignment. The assignment still held, it wasn't completely destroyed by AI like I had feared. And I think that it was an interesting development for the progression of my assignment. Additionally, in this class, of course, I have repeat students who've already completed this assignment in a different class. And so especially for those students, I said, you've already written it before in another class. Why don't you use the AI option this time to see how different? And then you have two products to compare and see what ChatGPT came up with and where it was basing that information and how accurate it was compared to your original personal story that you wrote. So it was an interesting experiment, and it was good to see that my assignment can still survive AI. And so I will continue forward with using this assignment and allowing students to have these options. One of the difference between the assignment was that if they wrote the narrative themselves, they could just post that alone. But if they were having ChatGPT write their narrative for them, they needed to post a video reaction to what ChatGPT came up with. And so that was the additional assignment criteria for that aspect of the assignment. This is an online class, so it's a great opportunity to get to see the students in video and get to know them a little bit more.